Good morning. I'm very pleased to be here and to open the day with you. When we heard from Nicolas that the theme of this forum was talent, cultivating talent, we thought we had to participate. Certainly not to give you any lesson or easy recipe, far from, but to witness the strategic importance that people play in a world like ours, in the luxury sector. And spotting talent, revealing, coaching talent is not only my experience, but also my passion. As you have heard in the introduction, I have been able to exercise this passion in different cultures and economic sectors. And I have consequently been able to see that nowhere else, apart from the luxury sector, people play such a unique and fundamental role. Talent here really makes the difference. In comparisons to industries where product manufacturing or technology stand out, luxury's differentiation is made through hands and minds of creators, of designers. Passion, excellence, sensitivity are key ingredients. It is consequently not a coincidence that talent identification and development form the essence of our work and our obsession. By the way, an obsession shared at the most senior level of the group. Bernard Arnault himself is convinced that the appropriate leadership at the head of a brand, if well led, is really making the difference and determinant of the business success. Yet, it is common to say that people are the most important asset. It has been confirmed in many surveys, in many instances. I was participating in the World Economic Forum of Davos, and when you speak to CEOs, they are all saying human capital is key. In particular, the 2013 Conference Board report let human capital appear as the #1 challenge of CEOs before innovation and operational excellence. And this is particularly true in the luxury sector. If we consider the delicate balance and fit one has to reach between a brand, the brand personality, its creative director, and the CEO, that delicate equation that Pierre-Yves Roussel is more going to specifically address and speak to you about. Representing the personality of the maison, its DNA, being able to understand its roots, and at the same time, translating them into modernity requires very fine skills and personality. The profiles we look for are able to deal with creative teams, reinvent the brand, reinvent the future, but not lose their soul, pay attention to details, and at the same time, think about strategy, look at paradoxes, and deal with a lot of ambiguities. But when I say talent, of course, I also mean talent at all levels, not only CEOs or creative directors. And especially if you look at LVMH, we are increasingly becoming a retail group. So people in the store, sales staff, a store manager, have a real impact on business that we can measure and observe on a daily basis. So talent is key, talent at many levels of the pyramid, and talent can be diverse. Particularly in our case, if you look at the many maisons, or the brands, we call them maisons, but the brands we have, nearly 70 of them, they are diverse, they are different, they have different cultures, and so we look for diverse profiles and different cultures. You understand how strategic it is for us to attract, retain, and develop the most talented people when you look at how the group has evolved in a very dynamic manner these last years. During the 7 years I have been with LVMH, we grew from approximately 60,000 people to over 110,000 today. Mainly outside of France, 80% of our people work outside of France, and that growth has come from organic growth, but also acquisitions. And therefore, talent is a strategic imperative, and for us, supporting the growth with the right people is fundamental. So how do we do this? First, in building and entertaining what I call a virtuous circle. It starts with the reputation of the group and of the brands, and there we can really build on the success and the very solid reputation of LVMH, but it's not enough. We also have to work in parallel to build an employer brand. In the race for talent, we have to be able to offer a meaningful value proposition. What are the career perspectives? What do we stand for? How easy is it to integrate our group? What are the working cultures and our values? In a very diverse and decentralized group like LVMH, the challenge is to build a promise that would add value to the brands, but also respect their own identity and differences, promoting common beliefs and values. We have created our signature that we've called the future of tradition. It is more than just words or a slogan. It represents a true invitation to be part of a wonderful and dynamic journey and create new chapter of the history of established brands, perpetuate savoir-faire and translating the stories of our brands into today, into the contemporary world, bridging the past to the present and to the future. Thanks to the variety of our sectors, which I think you've been able to witness in this short movie, and our multiple locations, we are able to offer great career opportunities to people, and this is really a unique competitive advantage. Not only important to attract talent, but also to retain and develop them. Obviously, it is then important to live up to that promise. Yes, we need to attract new talent from the outside, but in parallel, we also need to work to better understand who our key people are internally. Having a shared view about the competencies needed for the future, a kind of a talent risk assessment, is very important. Once a year, we conduct a very broad global talent organization review linked to the strategy and business challenges of our maison in the group all over the world. It is a considerable work of diagnosis that allows to detect talent and to work on the future on our succession plans. It gives us a very detailed picture of our internal talent pool. From this in-depth review, linked again to business strategy, we have been able to derive our HR roadmap, guiding actions and initiatives, and anticipating the needs for the future. Making succession planning an ongoing objective is very important. Do we have the right skills in our talent pool, the right diversity? Are we able to prepare the future with the right succession plans? This is piloted at group level and allows to share feedback and break the silos to promote career mobilities across the group. It allows not only to offer career moves to our people, but also to circulate and transfer best practices and know-how from one maison to another, from one business sector to another, and at the same time to develop the skills of our talent in offering them new assignments and new perspectives. This mechanism is replicated in the world, in the different regions, in the US, in Asia, of course, in Europe, and has allowed us just last year to implement 2,000 career moves for our executives. So 2,000 of our executives moved from one sector, one maison, or one region to another last year. At the same time, it has also allowed us to significantly strengthen our plans for succession. So knowing talent, our talents inside, building their skills and offering them new challenges creates motivation, build loyalty and retention, disseminate our values and know-how, and produce tangible results, which in turn affects our reputation as an employer. Consequently, it allows us to attract the best people from both inside and outside the industry, capable to bring fresh air and to cope with luxury's critical cultural nuances. This is what I called the virtuous circle that allows us to build the future of tradition.
Good morning. This year it is exactly 20 years since I graduated from Wharton. So many great memories and friends all over the world, and a few of them here today. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for your invitation. When Bernard Arnault hired me 10 years ago, I remember him telling me Here, we don't build nuclear plants or locomotives, but we create dresses and shoes. Do you see yourself spending 3 hours in a meeting with a bunch of weird guys looking at handbags or a lipstick? At the time, for me, after 12 years at McKinsey, creativity only meant a brainstorming session in an office building with a flip chart and a few colleagues in gray suits. You don't meet Marc Jacobs, Phoebe Philo, or Karl Lagerfeld in the corporate world. LVMH is founded on an incredible portfolio of 60 exceptional brands. Some of them are more than 200 years old, but others have just been created very recently. I see that we've not updated our list of brands because we acquired 2 brands last month in London, G.W. Anderson, which is a very promising young designer, and Nicholas Kirkwood, who is a very talented shoe designer. They both have their own brand, and we've taken significant stakes in those 2 brands. Each brand has in common a unique identity and personality, what we call the brand DNA, a concept that LVMH has conceptualized and popularized more than 20 years ago, and that captures the complexity and the architecture of a luxury brand. In short, luxury brands, the maison, as we often call them, combine a set of very specific attributes. First, a founder, always an incredible visionary, highly creative, and a true entrepreneur. Second, one or several iconic products that resonate with the taste of the time, but also remain totally modern years after they have been created. Third, an exceptional quality, the best ingredient, the best material, fabric, assembled by highly skilled and trained artisans. And fourth, a group of followers, true personalities of their time, actors, artists, rock stars, business leaders. They have been the source of inspiration for the designers and have become part of the maison identity, like Audrey Hepburn and Hubert de Givenchy. LVMH goal is to continuously energize each one of our 60 brands to keep them shining like stars. It feels sometimes like juggling with multiple balls in the air at once. Our challenge is to ensure that each one of our brands has the right set of creative and managerial talent, fully aligned on the brand DNA, sharing the same vision and objective. It is like cooking. It seems easy when you read the recipe, but it's very difficult to execute. Creative people are everywhere, but creative leaders are rare. And finding the right match for each of our brands is a real challenge. Creative talents have this very unique ability to dream the future. They're a few steps ahead of us. They feel how the society is evolving, they sense the underlying changes, and they know how to inject modernity in our historical brands and build new ones. Creative talents are the lifeblood of our group. In fashion, this is very obvious as we are reinventing our product ranges every season, but it is also true in the other luxury sectors of LVMH. In wine and spirit, with our chef de cave, that assemble wines and champagne. In perfume and cosmetics, with Lenné, who are assembling ingredients to create great perfumes. In watch and jewelry, with our joaillier. People often ask me, how do you know when it is the right time to change a designer of a brand? It's maybe one of the questions you asked me with some of the news on Marc Jacobs last week. I often answer, it's like a marriage. Both parties when the passion is over. It can last 5 years, 10 years, or a lifetime. There is no rule. What is important is to always keep in mind that brands always come first, as they are meant to last forever. The main mission of our creative leaders and brand CEOs is to write a chapter or two of a book that started many years ago and will continue many years. We will still drink Dom Pérignon champagne and carry LV travel bags in 100 years. Our objective is not creativity per se, but to create desirable products and services that surprise and seduce customers. We are entrepreneurs and want to build successful, large and global businesses from our brands. For that, we need to have great business leaders in each of our brands. Successful business leaders are usually very smart, very charismatic, and very driven. Most of them coming out of Wharton. But we are looking for more. We need the right and the left brain leader. We are looking for what we call inspired business leaders, true creative entrepreneurs. Everyone has a right and left brain, but most often we underexploit the creative side. I look also for this dimension when I interview potential candidates. It can take different shapes and forms. Our brand CEOs have to develop their own sensibility and learn how to constructively dialogue with their creative talents. Dealing with creativity is like sailing a boat. You have to master some key techniques, practice a lot, experience some pitfalls, take risks, and then you understand how to make the best use of the wind to optimize your journey. Today, anyone can see that fashion is diverse. Fashion diktats do not exist anymore. People are too independent just to follow trends. Diversity has been at the heart of Bernard Arnault's vision for LVMH from its inception. He was the first to have the vision of a multi-brand portfolio of luxury and fashion houses or maisons to offer that diversity to the consumers. Our success going forward will continue to rely on our ability to protect and nurture the diversity and the richness of our portfolio of brands to always make them desirable. The true goodwill of the brand, of the group, which account for 80% of our market capitalization, if I remember well my finance courses from Wharton, are talents that are capable of bridging the complexity and sometimes the self-contradictory of the luxury world. Timeless and reactivity, tradition and innovation, discipline and freedom, global reach, and attention to detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal and Pierre-Yves. I think it'll be Pauline's turn next, and she hasn't gotten to go to the microphone. But I think as we go forward, first of all, with Pauline, we'd like to explore differences in terms of the US market and how it's set up. I think, Pierre-Yves, we'd like to explore the talent that it takes on the creative side versus the non-creative side, although they too, I'm sure, have to be creative from a managerial point of view, but how you manage that. And getting back to you, Chantal, it's, I think, again, how do you find the right people? And as brands change over time, as they perhaps lose their luster, how do you manage those kinds of transitions? But let me start with Pauline, who heads the US. And I think, as we know, the US is much more of a mass market kind of mentality, I would say. And we have never had this European tradition of very high-end luxury brands. So when it comes to the US market and the teams that you have in the US, how much you just try to import the European perspective, and how much do you have to adapt and adjust for the US market?
So I'd say it's a blend. Historically, the company's approach was to just import. And the US arms, which are run in more of a siloed fashion, reporting to their maisons, and mostly in France, some in Italy, most of the watch brands in Switzerland, were there to deliver. And that is being rethought, not in a way that would change the brand positions or the DNA, but in a way that would resonate much more powerfully with the US marketplace. If you look at the US, it has by far the largest number of millionaires in the world, largest number of billionaires. In fact, about 40% of the world's billionaires are based in the US, 30% of the world's millionaires are based in the US, and only 19% of the world's luxury products are sold in the US. So it's still an underdeveloped market, and it's, I would say, obviously not because of affordability and not because of the appeal of these products, but really because the communication hasn't quite closed the gap. So that's part of my challenge and the people who run the divisions within the US.
Okay. Pierre-Yves, obviously LVMH is famous for these wonderfully creative people who start the maison, and LVMH gets involved. But you also have people who run businesses. How do you put the two together, or how do you manage when there's, in a sense, potential conflict of the creative people wanting to do their thing versus the quarterly profit requirements for a publicly held company? How do you put all this together?
It's obviously not something easy. I would say it starts from the beginning. And the beginning is to make sure that we have, for every single of our brands, the right casting. the right casting on the managerial side and on the creative side. It takes time, and it starts, if I'm on the creative side, to make sure that we share the same vision, the same understanding of the brand, and the same objective. And we spend a lot of time looking for creative talent. We spend a lot of time discussing with them before we appointed them in our maison. And the time that is being spent in that discussion is extremely important. We always do it directly ourselves. We don't go through headhunters when it comes to the top creative talents. We approach them directly and we have that discussion directly ourselves. And that's, I would say, the beginning. So we all agree on the platform and the vision and the objectives. The second thing is we try, some obviously of the brands have been created by their founders, like Marc Jacobs, and he still owns a significant share into the company. So I would say there is an alignment because he's also a shareholder of his own company. But when this is not the case, because we have historical brands and we are bringing creative talent in those brands, we have to recreate a mechanism by which this alignment exists. All of our creatives are incentivized also on the business success of our companies. So we are not only interested in the creative success, but for us a creative success is a success if at the end of the day it has business success. What would be the point of designing dresses if you see them on the runway, but at the end of the day nobody would wear it in the streets? So we are very clear on that. It takes time. It doesn't mean that what is on the runway has to be wearable tomorrow, because that's not the objective per se of a runway. But at the end of the day, it has the creative injection has to transform into a business success.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the remuneration system, the creatives are responsible for profitability the same way as the managers who are in marketing or in other functions of the business?
They are not exactly on the same systems. Obviously, we adapt it. We don't want also to bother them with numbers every day or every week because you have to protect them. But they have to know what the status of the business. So we sit together with them often. Often meaning, not every week, but a couple of times in the year, where we sit with them and they know exactly how the business is doing, what is successful, what is not successful, what are the products that are doing well and not well. Mm-hmm. We try to do that, and there is a fine balance between overexposing them to the business side, because then it creates a lot of constraints and it can almost have a negative impact on the way they would create. But at the same time, if you don't do it, you keep them in their bubble. So you have to find the right balance of providing them enough information on how the business is going without overwhelming them with too much of the business side. Mm-hmm. And somewhat is the same thing with the business people. I mean, they have to understand what's going on the creative side, because otherwise they cannot dialogue with the creative people. But they don't jump into the creative per se, but they are capable of dialoguing, saying what is important for them for the business to be successful. And at the same time, the creative people have to be able to talk to the business people, saying this is important for me to be able to operate as a creative in the company. I need more resources. I need to have that type of talent. They have to be able to dialogue on what it takes to make the company successful.
Very good. Yeah, I'm more familiar with the advertising business where you have the creative side and the account management side, and there's always a tension, and how that tension is worked out is probably very, very important to the success of the advertising agency. Chantal, over time, a brand may lose its power and its cachet in the marketplace. How do you manage this, and how do you know when to make changes and change the creative people or change the business people? How is this process worked out? I mean, I guess especially if the original founder is still there.
That's indeed a very, very delicate question. I think, as Pierre-Yves was just mentioning, the market is there. We are supposed to be able to bridge the roots of the brand, their history, but also make them relevant today. And being able to pick up the trends, being able to please, to make people dream. And when that is not happening, then there is a need to revitalize the brand. But again, it's a very delicate act between preserving what needs to be preserved, the roots, and reinventing the future. And that is why the talent that is able to deal with that paradox is special and requires sensitivity, humility as well, because you have to be able to understand and analyze what has really made the brand special and at the same time reinvent it. So that's this creative tension is one of the skill which I believe makes our industry special and our job difficult.
Right. Pauline, let me go back to in a sense, the mass market versus the luxury market. I could wonder out loud, is there a major consumer products group that has ever been able to operate in the mass market as well as to operate in the luxury segment as perhaps a perfume segment? You can either answer that or not. But the other question I had in mind was, as an American working for a European firm, what advice would you give to many of us who might want to work in the States coming from Europe, or the reverse? How do we bridge these cultures, and how do you make these adaptations?
So I'll take your first question
Oh,
first, yes, because just to qualify, much of the conversation we've had thus far really pertains primarily to one of 5 sectors of industries that we're in. So LVMH is more diversified than it would appear. We call ourselves luxury, and we are. We certainly are premium brands in everything we do, or premium brand minded. But there's the fashion, which is very creatively driven, and then we have beauty and cosmetics that is not mass market, but I would say is more volume driven, has more replenishment opportunity. We have wine and spirits, which is high volume, particularly when you get outside of the finest champagnes that can only be produced in limited quantities. But we, at the other extreme, have a Hennessy and a few other brands in Scotch and other spirits. And then we have specialty retail. So in the US, and actually one of our largest individual brands is Sephora, which is over a $2 billion US business. And that doesn't account for the fact that it's a French headquarter with an even larger business outside the US. Sephora is a retailer. I'd say I consider that more masstige. So it carries prestige brands, but at a more accessible, a more accessible format than you would see in US department stores. And so across all of these different groups, we really are a masterful luxury hedge fund. Within the US, 3 of our 4 biggest are high volume businesses. So to answer your question for that market, I think you'd see a different mix. We're going to sell, fewer. Bulgari, for example, is one of the most prominent jewelry and watch brands in Japan. It is not a top 3 in the US, whereas we have Tag Heuer, which is the number 2 watch brand in the US, and it is at a different price point. So I'm just qualifying your answer to say this is how we can start to penetrate that market in a more meaningful way. The second part of your question, which is bridging the gap, I'm still learning. I am less than a year into the role. I have worked between my years at Bain as a consultant and my years at Carlyle as an investor. I've worked with dozens and been exposed to dozens of different companies. In almost all cases, these are multinational companies. I want to say LVMH is the first one of size that is a multinational company I've worked closely with that is not based in the US. And why that's important is more often than not, American companies are used to exporting their values, their go-to-market approach. And historically, Americans have been great when it comes to efficiency and automation and industrial development. Americans are also great storytellers. So great marketing, great brands coming out of America. You think of Nike, you think of Apple, and you think of Coca-Cola. But there is really nothing that comes out of the US that begins to replicate what LVMH is. So when I say I'm still learning, some of it is learning the thought process that goes into creating these extraordinary heritage brands that will and have in some cases lasted centuries. Some of it is the navigation and how decisions get made. and how to work with and around people of many different countries. We're headquartered in France. The executive committee is in France, but as I mentioned before, we have quite a few businesses now based in Italy. Most recently, the brand had announced the acquisition of Loro Piana, which is a deep heritage Italian brand. We also have 7 maisons that are based in the US, from Marc Jacobs to Donna Karan to Chandon Wineries, and a few others. So this is truly a multinational company with a lot of different cultures, with a very strong and important French overlay. And it is the most important piece of advice I'd give to any American, and I think it's particularly important to Americans, is to learn how to listen, because it's not really in the nature of an American to listen. We're good at talking. So I'm doing a lot of listening right now.
I'm happy it comes from you.
Americans are good at talking and talking loudly. If you go to a restaurant, you know where the Americans are. Let me throw this question out. It could be for anyone, and that is, in the last few years, there's been a lot of talk about global brands, that you could take a brand and create a uniform image and sell it anywhere in the world. I think to some extent there's been some questioning of that, and can you really have global brands, and how many can you point to, and there may even be a debate as to whether Coca-Cola is truly a global brand or whether it gets modified a little bit from market to market. But do you have a view on that? Are there any brands in particular within LVMH that you say are global brands that we're trying to sell everywhere versus brands that are for particular countries? I guess Bulgaria is not necessarily for a particular country, but it's maybe more appropriate in certain markets than others. But how do you think about global brands?
I think we have, obviously with 60 brands, we have a very diverse portfolio of brands. Some are very big, and some are very small. The 2 brands that we've acquired last month are less than 10 million, so they are really marginal. Obviously, Loro Piana is much bigger, and Vuitton is the largest brands in the industry. But all of them, with no exception, are global brands or have the potential to be global brands, regardless of their size. And I think that's the beauty of luxury, is you can have, as long as you have a very defined positioning, very specific, not trying to be everything for everybody, but really having a very specific positioning. This is relevant pretty much everywhere in the world. If you look at Dom Pérignon is large in numbers, but the number of bottles that we produce of Dom Pérignon is very limited, and we are constrained by production anyway. But it's a global brand. You can take any of our brands, they have a global reach, and we operate them in every single country of the world, sometimes with a very small presence. It might be just 1 point of sales, or we might just be in the US at Bergdorf, for example. If you take Loewe, which is one of our Spanish brands, we only sell Loewe at Bergdorf, on the ground floor, in the US. But it has a presence in the US, meaningful for this upper customer interested in a top-hand leather handbags brand that has been around for 160 years. And I think what I said, I think the market is looking for that diversity. And whether it's in fashion, obviously, which is the area I'm working in, but I think it's true in every single of our businesses. It's true in watch and jewelries, where we have large brands like Tiger, but we have some brands that would be considered as more niche or smaller, like Zenith, for example, or like Hublot, even though now it is growing.
Also, I think that people travel, and of course travel all over the world, and so our brands resonate with them anywhere. So we may not necessarily be present in one given country, but the population of this country traveling is going to see the brand and dream about the brand, and experience the brand maybe in different places. And so I absolutely concur with what Pierre-Yves says, which is really selling a global dream, which has maybe different specificities or different feelings in different parts of the world. But when the brand is iconic, when you have iconic products, then I think they resonate really globally.
Given that you are a very high-end house, could you ever have a brand that's too popular and therefore you withdraw that brand in some sense, or withdraw certain designs of that brand from the market?
I think that comes back to this notion of luxury. I mean, is luxury just the top end of the market or not? I think we have some of our brands, even on the retail side as Sephora, for example, or even DFS, we operate DFS, which gives us a great platform, by the way, to learn the global trends in the marketplace and expose our brands in the market. I think it's a question of integrity, and it's a question of applying the same rules that we have of being creative, building a great product, controlling the distribution, having the great people everywhere at every touch point with the customers. I mean, it's a set of things that we do, whereas it is at Vuitton, or, for example, if I take Marc Jacobs, or through the second leg of Marc Jacobs with Marc by Marc Jacobs, which is an extremely successful brand. So it's, I mean, obviously, the bulk of our brands are in the really upper end of the luxury sector, but we can have some brands that are positioned more into some of the brands into the so-called contemporary sector, as long as we apply the same set of rules, integrity, creativity, exceptional experience, and global reach.
So if we go back to talent then, and you're spanning this hierarchy from the very high end into contemporary, how do you get the talent to do all of that? That would seem that it would require a different set of skills and different knowledge of different markets and different kinds of markets, not just geographic markets, but selling to the contemporary market. Selling Marc by Marc Jacobs must be very different. It's in department stores, right? Than selling in one of your own stores. So how do you think about talent in that sense? If that question was clear enough.
Yes, I think that's what I was trying to say when I said talent is very diverse, because what is important is to reconcile the personality of the brand, the stage of the development, and therefore the attributes or the skills of the people we look for. As you rightly say, Marc Jacobs is different from Dior, which is different from Vuitton. So we will try to adapt the profiles to the personality of the brand, and reconciling that match is what is difficult. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it allows us to tap into a wider talent pool.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the only thing I would add is what links all of the brands and what is reinforced from day one through year 10 is a value system of what makes a great brand. And I would say in luxury, there's some nuanced differences versus what I might have experienced in more of a typical high-quality American fast-moving consumer good company. This idea of something that will last the ages, this idea of something that is absolutely defect-free in its production and its execution, the notion of service around the brand. So it isn't just the product, but it's how the product is sold and how it's communicated. There's an awful lot of thought and of sort of boundaries that get set, that anyone coming into the company becomes quickly aware. I would say in general, a manager would be better rewarded for, in the unfortunate case that he or she misses the numbers but for the right reasons, than hits the numbers for the wrong reasons in terms of strategic execution.
Pierre, you just bought 2 brands in the UK, you said. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So do you ever have failures?
Yeah, I mean, it's brands is not an easy journey. So some brands sometimes are very successful, and sometimes they are going through challenges. Some of them have been around for 150 years. So I mean, it's difficult just to be successful, for 150 years.
Well, are any of them ever fads, and they just rise very, very fast and then just drop very quickly?
Sometimes you have, I mean, especially in the fashion sector, where there can be some real trends and real acceleration, so that we see that. It's less true in the other sector, but in fashion.
So what would you do if you saw that it was really becoming a fad? You would just eliminate that brand, or
no? First, we anticipate. So before we potentially have to renew a brand, to re-inject creativity, for example, into a brand, or to adjust the strategy. You have some early signs before sales are starting to go down. So our job is to anticipate. So we can see some early signs of things that needs to be changed and adjusted. We try to avoid going through crisis and to try to reposition a brand, which we rarely do. It's mostly adjustment as we go. So we are changing, we're adjusting, we're adapting. We have to remember that 20 years ago, that industry did not exist. I mean, all of those brands were family-run brands and owned. Most of them were local brands, and they were operating in a few markets. And so we are all learning. I mean, the generation that has been at LVMH in the last 20 years, the people I learned from, who have been running those brands for the last 20 years, I mean, they have been learning as they were really building that group. There was nobody coming from the luxury industry at LVMH, because by nature there was no luxury industry. So if you take every single of our CEOs that have been there and that have been building Vuitton and Dior and all the other brands, they were coming from other sectors, and they have been learning as they were leading those brands. So we are learning from them, all of us, because they have been there for a longer period of time, and we are learning ourselves, because I think I've been there only for 10 years, but I've seen already so many changes in the last 10 years. New market openings, the market being more open, new brands emerging, and so on. So you really have to see it as a very recent industry. That's why it is so important that we operate as a learning organization, as Chantal has said, and that we really can get the learnings moving from one brand to another, which is a real challenge, because as we are a very decentralized culture, because with 60 brands, we don't run the brands from LVMH in the headquarters in Paris, Avenue Montaigne. I mean, we're just pulling it wouldn't work. So people are empowered in the brands. But we are bringing and we are creating a system by which everybody can learn from one another. So you can be an entrepreneur at LVMH like you would be an entrepreneur outside, but you benefit from having access to tremendous resources and experience, which is much easier to tap as if you were to be an entrepreneur on your own with your own brand outside the group.
Exactly, and I think the transmission of know-how, as Pierre-Yves said, learning from people who have been the precursor, who have built those brands, is key. At the same time, injecting new perspectives as the brand become global, as digital is coming in our way, as customer experience has to be constantly different. And, CRM, and it used to be a dirty world to think, customers. I mean, we are luxury, we know what customers want, right? We define the trends for you. Well, actually, I think you can do both. You can do both, but you have to understand who your customer base is, how to better access them, how to make sure that they will be loyal. So all of that are new dimensions that have been injected into the industry. And I think the magic is combining, again, different profiles from other sectors that we can learn from and benefit also from this great internal talent pool. I was reading, actually, and I know that there are a number of headhunters in the room here. It's maybe not going to please them, but I was reading that only 40% of executives that are brought in jobs, not only luxury, by the way, fail from the outside, in the first 18 months. So again, that's a very, very important reason, and that is why we also had to look very deep inside where are our talent? Because sometimes, our responsibility is also to grow people and to be able to transfer that knowledge. So having a nice balance between exported talent, coming in with new skills, but also revealing our own talent pool is very important. And I'm proud to say here that as Pierre was saying, through those combinations, we have now been able to fill in 2 out of 3 of our key positions are filled in internally. It is also a very important message you want to give your own people. Yes, it is possible here. It's not only people from the outside. It builds loyalty, it disseminates best practices, and as I mentioned, it's allowing us to be seen as a talent academy and therefore to be quite competitive when it comes to attract people, because they know they are maybe going to join Vuitton today, but they will be running the FS tomorrow or become the president of Fendi the day after. And I think that is really something we should capitalize on.
Let me just ask 2 more questions. The specific question and a more general one. The specific one would be what you just described, Chantal, about developing your people. do you have a problem retaining your people? If your people are so good, don't others, these other fashion houses say, you know, we need people, why don't we just go to LVMH because they know how to develop people?
I have to be careful because
yeah, you do. You
I don't
do.
want to say
you
no,
don't
not
have
at
to
all.
answer it if you don't want to.
No, obviously it's a key concern. But as I was trying to say, I think that through this wonderful ecosystem of maison, of brands, we are uniquely positioned to try to provide beautiful careers for people.
So you can provide opportunities for people so they don't have to leave.
And I think what makes our culture unique is people really, again, have an impact. As we were saying, the wrong CEO is actually going to make the business fail. And so people, I think what people look for is meaning in their career, meaning and being able to impact whatever they do. And we let people have this impact in this very entrepreneurial culture. We have uniquely successful brands, so those are two key recipes. And of course, we try to stay close to our talent. That's an ongoing watch. But our turnover rate at the high level is pretty low. So I'm touching wood because I don't want that to change because it's an ongoing work.
So looking at things from a Bain or McKinsey perspective or whatever, I could look at LVMH and say, wow, you have an awful lot of different businesses. How can you possibly manage so many different businesses? Now, I guess what you just said is, well, we're decentralized, but still with 60 different maisons, is that and buying more, right? So is that a question is that anything you ever worry about? Or are you just like Warren Buffett and you just keep acquiring businesses and making more and more money?
I think, you know, this was a question I had when I joined LVMH with my fresh McKinsey background. Right. I was asking that question. Right. And it's funny because since
these days it's all about focus and focus. And
it's, the group has organically grew through first growing the brands we have. They were all small in the first place. Even Vuitton 20 years ago was a very small brand. I mean, obviously as compared to what it is today, but even as compared to what we would call a small or medium-sized brand in our portfolio today. So, and I think we've also grown through acquisition, but we've been very careful. We don't make, I mean, there's obviously brands, there are not so many interesting brands, by the way, out there. And we've been very careful in the acquisitions. So we're not acquiring for acquiring brands. And we believe that when it's the right brand and we really believe that it's a great fit in our portfolio, like Loro Piana, we will do it. And it's not we don't go through financial screening of what's out there in the market. It always starts with we meet people that we really like, we really share the same vision. They are not desperate, to sell. I mean, they are usually very successful company. They have been run for many, many years.
You probably don't want them if they're desperate to sell.
Yeah, usually it's not for sale, by the way.
Right.
And so, if you take Loro Piana, there's been the first probably discussion that was just informal discussion took place 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So we have discussions like that going on with people that we really are impressed with the success that they are having in their own field. And maybe one day our journeys crossed, and then we decide to do something together. Mm-hmm. And we're probably the only group that can provide for those brands that are usually family-run brands and might have some issues when it comes to succession. Okay. We can offer for them a home that they would continue to grow their own brand, being respectful of the integrity. Usually the family and members are still involved in the business in different shapes and forms, and there is no one receipt. So it's really on a case-by-case basis, but it has nothing to do with a McKinsey chart or an investment banker kind of screening out of the market. Sorry to say that coming from my background, but it's really the way we approach it.
Great.
And I would just add, similarly, if I were looking at this as a Wharton case study, it would not make sense. It would not fit the matrix, right? But the reality is I came here from the Carlyle Group, and since Carlyle's inception, which, by the way, coincides with around when Mr. Arnault started to build this group 20 some odd years ago, Since that beginning, they've bought over 800 companies. Now, the difference is, number one, there was no strategic imperative, right? So they're not all under one. Even the fact that we can couple everything under 5 sectors makes us quite disciplined compared to Carlyle. Secondly, we don't buy with in mind that there'll be an exit. And I actually think that that creates better disciplines because there are, over time, some synergies that can be tapped. There's more patience. And there are some common values that I mentioned earlier that disseminate across the organization. But it is not a business that is easy to understand from the outside in, and it is certainly not a business that would be replicated easily in a more linear marketplace like the US.
That is an interesting point. You're not buying with an exit in mind at some point. You're buying for the very, very long run, hundreds of years.
Ideally.
Okay, let me thank our panel. You were absolutely wonderful, and we very, very much appreciate you coming. So thank you very, very much.